But then this takes us to a few years later. So obviously, the Winter War was the start of this kind of moving of borders, and shifting tides of politics and geopolitics in Europe. The Germans continued with their kind of conquest of Poland, France, the Benelux region, and kind of dominating Western Europe. And the Soviets obviously annexed the Baltic states. They took their share of Poland, and they kind of maintained control over those kind of things and were still building up their industry. However, in 1941, the Germans obviously declared war on the Soviet Union, and 3 days or 4 days after that, the Finns then declared war on the Soviet Union in the Continuation War.
Again, never heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, the Continuation War. I mean, naturally, as you would assume, the Finns were not very happy that they had to give up 9% of their land. They also lost, I think, their second biggest city as well in that land as well. So,
and what is their second?
I'm not entirely sure.
Presumably, Helsinki being the first.
Because I'm not entirely sure the name of the city, but it's in that region between kind of like the Russian border and the Finnish border, like in that middle zone.
But that's a huge population zone to just suddenly lose.
Yeah, and obviously the other thing was that like a lot of the people who obviously the Finns who lived in that city moved to other parts of Finland. They didn't become part of Russia.
Well, this is sounding awfully familiar again to bring it back to the present day of the early phases of the Russia-Ukraine war and the questions around Donetsk and the kind of how Russian are some of these how Russian are some of these populations. Do they want to be taken back? Do they not? All this kind of stuff. So,
but then we also go back to the kind of policy of Russification that lots of countries underwent under the Russian Empire, and how legitimate is it when you move out a bunch of natives and then move your own people in just to transform the region? I mean, I guess that's another question for a different conversation. But obviously, this is where we get into the real kind of the meat of the topic, really, because obviously we have this perception that the Finns joined the Axis. They were fighting with the Germans. They did fight alongside the Germans. But the Continuation War was the result of them kind of seeing the opportunity to reclaim their stolen territory along with more.
It's a continuation,
So to kind of reiterate that they really they did believe in that kind of image of greater Finland that they had, and they felt that it was more achievable as soon as the Germans invaded the Soviets. So officially, the Finns allowed the Germans to station German soldiers in their country, in their territory. They also attacked from Finland as well. So the Finns, I think they aided in the siege of Leningrad, or kind of the encirclement of Leningrad during the war. Obviously, they never actually took the city, but that's kind of another section of the war.
So interesting that the Germans are taking the Finns under their wing, and yet they are still getting massively bogged down in Russia, and they're unable to. Or is this in that early part where we are seeing those spectacular victories by the Germans?
Well, the original
and is that why? I mean, is it because they have help from the Finns in this? Is that?
Well, there are a number of different reasons as to why the German invasion of the Soviet Union wasn't successful. Initially, they saw a lot of success because they obviously had the blitzkrieg tactics that worked so well in Western Europe, and obviously when they capitulated other nations insanely quickly. But with the sheer scale of Russia, as we see from other parts of history, like Napoleon.
Well, it's the old maxim that Monty was keen on: never invade Russia or China.
Yeah.
It's not gonna,
But it's also, I think the system that they had, the military system of blitzkrieg, was that it was really just based on logistics, and obviously the armored kind of corps would proceed. They'd go first. They'd break through the enemy line at blazing speed, and create these in massive encirclements that then the infantry and the supply lines would then follow them through the gap. Resulting in massive encirclements of Soviet soldiers in lots of different cities around on their way to kind of Moscow. Yeah. However, it works in short distances, but then as soon as they reached any of the big cities in Russia, say like Stalingrad or Leningrad, Moscow, they met massive amounts of resistance, and when they work, as if the blitzkrieg only works if they're able to secure tactical victories along the way. If they can't establish those encirclements and they can't establish the supply lines, they can be encircled themselves, they can be broken down by running out of fuel, they can run out of ammo and things like that as well. So there's a lot of different factors that led to the...
Well, and Napoleon had a lot of these problems as well.
Exactly. So on the paper, they maybe could have gone further, they could have gone faster, but in reality it was a lot harder for them to do that over a long distance.
They were quite good at things on paper, the Germans. They're very efficient. They could say, "Oh, we'll need this many troops, and we'll go." Da, da, da. But maybe something they lack is the sort of just the real sense of the kind of lived experience of what is this actually going to look like? Are the weather conditions? Are we really going to be able to conquer those weather conditions? Because those are some severe, especially if you go into the winter.
Well, also the real goal for the Germans was to capture the Caucasus oil fields to sort of secure their supplies of fuel, because their military was so heavily dependent on tanks and armor.
And the further away you get from home, the harder it is.
It's harder to supply. So that was one of the contributing reasons to why Germany didn't win in Russia. But obviously, going back to Finland again. Finland actually.
Can I stop you there just to say, because our listeners might be wondering, and I'm certainly wondering, what date are we looking at now? Where you currently are in the story? What?
So continuation war lasted from obviously 1941. A few days after the Germans declared war on the Soviet Union, broke the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
I see. Okay, yeah.
But this lasted all the way to 1944, when the Russians started pushing the Germans back.
It's a serious continuation.
So this because obviously that war went on for a long time. It wasn't a few months. Like the German invasion of the Soviet Union lasted until the late stages.
So it's kind of the turbocharged version of the Winter War with the Germans on side.
Yeah,
kind of the revenge of the Finns plus.
But so obviously Finland, they did actually regain. Well, they regained all of the territory that they lost in the armistice agreements, plus more land as well that they secured. So they actually increased their borders and controlled more land than they were originally asking for. And obviously, as soon as the Germans started getting pushed back, this is where things start getting tricky, because obviously the Finns fought alongside the Germans. They offered, access to their country. They offered access to supply troops there and attack from their country. And they fought alongside them in every kind of aspect in that sense. However, where the line kind of gets a bit blurry is where we think, okay, any country that's in the Axis was kind of actively collaborating with the Germans in everything that they did. Yeah. The Finns had a relatively small Jewish population during the war. The number escapes me, but I'm fairly sure it's a few thousand. I think not too many.
And that would probably be the Pale of Settlement in the Tsarist period. The policies of various Tsars of pushing the Jews out towards Eastern Europe and the sort of Baltic regions. They would have spread out, and a few of them, as you say, would have ended up kind of up in Finland.
Yeah, and essentially, there were obviously the Nazis requested for the Finns to send Jews to concentration camps in Poland and Eastern Europe. And the Finns refused. They refused on every account. I think there was maybe one instance where I think they had to try it. They had to send 10 people, but only one person actually ended up in kind of in a camp.
Oh, so a little bit like on our end of things. I think we had one Jewish victim of the Holocaust on Alderney, in the Channel Islands, which the Germans famously occupied. So both us and the Finns, we managed to only have one casualty in that regard.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part that people maybe don't know is that Finland actually refused to take part in hostility in other parts of Europe as part of the Axis. They sort of, as a condition of them obviously allowing Germany to use their land as a staging ground, and for the Finns to aid them in invading the Soviet Union.
So you wouldn't have seen any sort of Einsatz group and no sort of death squads that made their way up into Finland. And
I mean, there may have been that tried to do.
It sounds like there weren't. If only one Jew was.
I mean, they famously refused Himmler his request to send Jews to concentration camps by stating, "We don't have a Jewish solution. There's
no Jewish problem.
There's no Jewish
therefore,
problem.
there is no need for a final solution.
No need for that. And then Germany at that point wasn't really in any position
speaking Himmler's language back to him. Yeah.
Yeah. So they did refuse in that case, and they also sort of said like our involvement in this is purely for our own aims.
Well, like a lot of things, my enemy's enemy is my friend. It's always comes down to that.
So it was very much that kind of relationship, and then obviously then we get to the point where the USSR pushes the Germans back, and then this is obviously the first domino that starts to lead to the end of the war in Europe and the Germans falling eventually. But as soon as the Germans were pushed back past Leningrad, and obviously the Russian army had then gone into Finland and started to take more land. There was then another peace agreement between Finland and the Soviet Union, which then enforced kind of harsher peace terms. So obviously then they had to
fool us once, that kind of thing.
So they then obviously had to cede the land that they had ceded in the last peace agreement, plus more regions in northern Finland they had to give over to the Soviet Union. There was also war reparations. That were
more swinging terms the second time around.
And then again enforced kind of neutrality.
I suppose they thought, well, you didn't seem to learn the lesson the first time, so we're going to really hurt you now.
Yeah, but surprisingly, they still kept their majority independence. There was no kind of puppet government installed.
Maybe the Soviets at that point kind of realised this is a very kind of nationalistic, proud population, and it's going to be a really tough one to a bit like, again, if we bring it forward, I think Putin maybe misunderestimated, but that's a George Bushism. Underestimated the extent to which the Ukrainians would not just roll over and would not see themselves as he saw them, i.e. part of the greater Russian Empire. This kind of in this broad sort of Peter the Great kind of vision he has of all of that. So an interesting parallel.
Yeah, and I think obviously, just to give a bit of context on the timeline. So obviously now we're into 1944. So the war in itself is not over. World War II is still raging across the world, but this conflict in this very specific theatre was ending due to the agreement between Finland and the Soviet Union. Where obviously there were all these concessions, lots of things that the Finns had to give up in exchange for their independence. And then obviously when we kind of the most interesting kind of aspect of this peace deal was that the Finns were then instructed at this point to expel any German forces, any German infrastructure or fighting capability from their land. And obviously officially Finland was part of the Axis at this stage. So this then interestingly led to a conflict between Germany and Finland, where the Finns demanded that the Germans leave their territory as this, we're neutral again now. Yeah. We've been well and truly we're done now, guys. We're finished.
We've done been told. Yeah.
So they obviously then demanded that they issued the ultimatum that they need to leave. The Germans refused and sort of wanted to continue the fight.
So they got more heart for it than the Russians do at this point. They still want to keep a foothold in.
Well, the thing is, it's a strategic position because even as they were getting pushed back in mainland Europe, they could then have that avenue to attack.
Probably some useful oil fields as well, I would think.
Maybe a few, but nothing substantial. It was
so the Finns aren't kind of resource rich, or
not in the sense that not to the degree that the Germans would have needed to really gain the foothold that they needed to push back, and also
at this point they're already rolling back anyway.
By this stage, you've got D-Day's pretty imminent, or it's already happened.
They've got bigger problems on the other side
their days are well and truly numbered by this point. But obviously, the Finns fought the Germans too, and to try and expel their forces. By this point, Germany didn't really. They put up a bit of a fight, but eventually with the aid of some Soviet help as well, they were able to expel the Germans from Finland entirely, which then resulted in kind of, obviously that's the end of Finland's war, pretty much.